Good afternoon. At this time, I'll call our Suffolk City Council work session to order. We do have one order of business this afternoon, and that is a 2045 Comprehensive Plan Update Economic Analysis Report. Mr. Manager, please provide an overview.
Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, Interim Director of Planning and Community Development, Kevin Wine, will provide the opening remarks and also introduce our consultant who's with us this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. I'll be brief this evening, but just wanted to provide y'all kind of an update as we promise to regularly do before you all as it relates to the comprehensive plan update, where we are, where we're going, and what that overall timeline in general looks like. So as it stands currently, we've kind of in phase 2 now, but phase 1 was the preparation, getting oriented, doing a lot of public engagement. I think we're very pleased with the amount of surveys that we've had returned to us, about 4,200 unique comments through our website and through the paper surveys we handed out. We still are handing out comment cards and processing those actively. So we're really in phase 2 right now as we begin to enter phase 3 of the plan update. So this fall, we're kind of setting the direction. We're going to begin having some workshops, both internally with staff, and we'll move towards some public workshops later in the winter. And at this point, still aiming for 2023 adoption at this point, with obviously that depends on when public hearings are scheduled. So that's kind of where we stand currently. Phase 2, which is kind of the September to January phase, as we have outlined here, we're going to continue to process public input. We've gotten a tremendous amount of input so far, but in a lot of ways, this is just the beginning. We anticipate a lot more public comment and a lot more opportunities to participate in the process. We're going to continue to research some of our technical issues. This is kind of in a response to the public comment that we've received at this point. And then we're going to do a really deep dive on land use, transportation, housing, parks, open space and the environment, and economic development, which you'll hear more about this evening. But all of these have their own separate chapters in the comp plan, so there's a lot of data there, a lot of information. Phase 3, this is when we get to late winter. We're looking to have those in-person workshop style meetings. At this point, we're planning to have opportunities in the north end of the city and the central area of the city. We'll continue our online engagement and activities. We'll have some targeted meetings with some stakeholders, and then we're getting to that public hearing and ultimate adoption. Just a reminder for everyone, Suffolk2045.org is our comprehensive plan website. This is solely dedicated to the 2045 comprehensive plan update. There's opportunity for comments there. There's contact information for our staff who are actively involved in this project. And there's also updates on where we are in the community and where we plan to be going forward. So with that being said, that update being provided, I'm proud to introduce tonight Kevin Hively. He's with Ninegret Partners, which is part of our consulting team. The goal this evening is to provide you with an economic update and housing baseline conditions summary for the city of Suffolk, how the city of Suffolk compares to the region, and how Hampton Roads kind of compares to the United States as a whole. So without further ado, Kevin.
Hi, thanks for having me. Can you all hear me? Great. I hope I don't lose my voice. This is I don't even know how many meetings this week already. So you're going to have to look up at these screens. So those of you who are going to may want, there's a number of charts. Some of them might be a little small for you to see from a distance. So we'll walk through them the best we can, and I'll do something I normally don't do, which is I'll try to go slow enough so that you can absorb them. The other thing we'd like to do is I'd like to go through it, and then you guys ask me questions afterwards, if that's okay, unless there's something really burning that you need to get to right away. So a couple of caveats about economic data, particularly at a city level. Most of the best sources are federal Most of the federal sources lag 2 to 3 years. The state of Virginia does, you guys are lucky because you both play the role of city and county. There is some data reported, but most of it lags 2 to 3 years. So where the economy actually is today, this is a backward-looking thing, and so just you need to take that into consideration. Also, some of the data is estimated, so rather than get into the question of how do you know it's 12,314, think about it more the order of magnitude that it's around 12,000 as opposed to the specific number, because there's a little bit of false precision in some of the estimates that the feds provide. And the idea of the economic and housing chapters for the comp plan is that they are not full-fledged economic strategies or full housing plan. They are just to provide context to set the tone for what may later be a more developed economic plan or specific housing strategy. So basically, the Suffolk economy is $3.6 billion on an inflation-adjusted basis, and 83% of that is the federal government. It's been essentially flat, as you can see that, from 2010 to, look at that, from 2010 to, this would be 2020, which is the most recent available, is essentially flat on an inflation-adjusted basis. However, don't despair necessarily. You actually are doing better than the MSA. You were much better than the MSA. You were much better than the MSA in the early part of the decade. You fell for a variety of reasons, but now you're ahead of the MSA. It's also very important to note that the MSA, if you notice this line, has been flat. It's moved up and down a little bit, but it's essentially flat within a range with a pretty significant decline in 2020. I should say that the 2020 number does not necessarily reflect COVID because of the lag of the way information is reported, so it was trending downward already anyway. Let me go back one more. Hold on. Oops, we're going forward. How do we go backwards? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll do it. This will be much better. All right. The piece that I want to really point out, though, is you are well below the performance of the state. And that is at the region level as well as at the community level. We also were asked to look at it compared to some other southern cities. And so this includes Charleston, South Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, Richmond, Virginia, Savannah, and then Suffolk, Hampton Roads. Your color schemes are the same. We indexed it off of 100 so we could show comparative growth because the economies are very different in size. And what you can see is Suffolk is in green, is in this lighter green, again showing the dip, as well as, but the rest of the southern city economies were growing substantially faster, and again, substantially faster than the Hampton Roads economy overall. On hours and wages and earnings, you all are slightly ahead of the MSA, which is a good thing, and you have historically been ahead of the MSA in that. However, you are $11,000 on average below the state. Prior to COVID, there were about 45,000 jobs, and there's about 45,000 jobs in total, including about 10,000 people self-employed. You can see that here. The self-employed has grown quite substantially. You've added about 12,000 jobs. You've also added about 2,000 jobs in terms of self-employment. Self-employment in Suffolk is about 22% of the base versus about 18% for Hampton Roads. Looking again at this at an index, just so you can see it on a comparative basis, you have, again, starting at 100, so because make the numbers comparable, you can see that your employment growth, which is the top line, has been substantially better than the MSA overall. The MSA is the 102 in the orange, which is, again, a positive, but again, relative to the rest of the region, the South, the southern economies, and the state, you're still behind. Key industries, the top 4 industries represent government, healthcare, and social services, retail, professional, technical services, and professional technical means engineering, science, R&D, marketing, legal. Those are your key industries, and they have had pretty good growth since 2010 to 2020. You have more, with the exception of government, you have a higher concentration of these jobs than the Hampton Roads. And your professional technical employment has essentially more than doubled. You are also, you've had a transportation and warehousing increase of about 80%. Your percentage of employment, which is on this other slide, you're at 7%, the region's at 4%. So you're about double those types of jobs. So the impact of agriculture. Agriculture is important. I want to caveat this information for a couple of reasons. This is based upon the U.S. Census of Agriculture, which is done every 5 years. The last version that was published was 2017. That was when it was published, which means that the data is probably from 2015. It's self-reported data. It's subject to margin of error. So, but it is also the only source that gives you any idea of how you compare across the country or compared to the United States. It's the only data source like that. It's the only source that provides this. So what is going on today may not look like this, but it was the only information. It's not, typically nobody collects this information except for the feds. So again, just to quickly, it's about 270 farms. There's estimated to be about 825, 800, it's down from about 825 employees at 2010. And it's also important to remember that a lot of the employees are part-time or contractors. It looks like, based upon this census, that about 30% of the farm producers were over the age of 65. So that's an important number to look at. You got 84% of, it's $54 million in revenue, 84% of that revenue is crops. Based upon this, again, the Census of Agriculture, you are 16th in Virginia overall, 6th in the value of crops. And then the last one is, that I think is very interesting, which is the value of your horticultural activities puts you in the top 10%, not the top 10 counties, but the top 10% in the country. So now I want to talk about workforce. This is what's known as inflow-outflow. It is data that is collected by the Census Bureau. It's based upon a number of different pieces of information, including unemployment insurance, information about where employees live at the address level, tax return data, and a bunch of other things, and they put it together to give people an idea of where they live, where they work, and what the flows are. Again, it lags. It's 2019 is the most recent that's available. So this, obviously this may have changed, but we looked back 10 years and percentage-wise, it hadn't changed very much. A couple of key things here. First of all, it's not, the blow things, is there another way to blow this up? Right here? If you can see this, it's about 21,000 people work in Suffolk but live outside the city. About 9,000 to 10,000 live and work in Suffolk, which is about 32%. 31,000 people live in Suffolk and work outside the city. By comparison, which is that next bullet down, there's 31%, that's 31% of the people who live and work in Chesapeake, 25% in Portsmouth, 26% in Norfolk. Basically, what you have is an entire region that serves both as employment center and bedroom community at the same time. It's one of the reasons why the traffic is the way it is here, because you have so many people moving around all over the place to both work and live and shop. I mean, if you think about it, it's not that different than New York City, right? The difference is that Manhattan, Queens, they were all independent. They were boroughs, but they were independent cities before. In a lot of ways, your region functions in the same way that New York City functions, which is each thing has its own role and place, and people move across it all the time. If you were a one city, the numbers would look very different, right? About 12% of the people who work in Suffolk drive more than 50 miles for work. Chesapeake, it's also 12%. Suffolk, 46% drive 10 to 25 miles. Chesapeake drive about 30 to 25 miles. Chesapeake, it's a little bit less. It's about 30% travel, 10 to 25 miles. On the workforce piece, again, hopefully we can blow this. There we go. Doesn't want to. Let's see if I can. All right, here we go. We'll see if this works. And hopefully I won't mess it up too bad. What you find here is in some of your top sectors, it's the Suffolk versus the state. You're the light green you're the top number with the actual number attached. What this basically shows you is the age of your workforce. In a lot of the cases, you are much younger than the state. So, for example, in manufacturing, which is an important element of employment here, you're 29%. The state's approaching almost 34, 35% over the age of 55. The reason why this matters is because it talks about what your future workforce needs are going to be. You're at about a quarter, and again, you're in a better position than the state. It's not ideal, but it's still, but you're in a much better position than the state is overall. On workforce educational attainment, there's a very interesting dynamic that happens in Suffolk, which is when you look at the jobs that are in Suffolk and what their educational requirements are, which you can do through this database that we're talking about, which is known as LEHD, what you find is that Suffolk residents have more education than most of the jobs required in Suffolk. So you have about 18% of the jobs in Suffolk require college degrees, versus 30% of Suffolk residents having college degrees. So now I'm going to jump to housing. You have about 37,000 housing units. You are 70% owner occupied versus the metro region being 64% owner occupied. And you can see the single duplex, you have more single family homes than the state or the MSA overall. Your housing stock is newer. A large chunk of it has been built since 1990, which is no surprise given what you guys all know has happened here from a growth perspective. Your housing prices, this is different than how you would normally see median sales price of a home. That's the typical way it's reported. This is what's known as a all transactions database, which looks at people who've done refis and what those appraisals came in, et cetera. And so it allows you to look at the same home and what happened with that price point of that same home, whether it did a refi, whether it did a second mortgage, whatever it might be, or if we're sold and what's happened. There's two ways to look at this. One is that you remain substantially below the region. The region is actually on top in the dotted line. Your housing prices are less than what the region is. It has stayed that way. It has grown at the same pace as the region, however. Home ownership rates, it looks like home ownership rates are falling. You were at 75% in about 2010. You're at 70.3% now. But again, you're still much higher than what the region is overall. And the rent burden, you have much higher rent burden than the state. What this basically looks at is people who with incomes, and are they paying more than 30% of their income in rent? You're at 51% of your renters are paying more than 30%, which is higher than both the state, but it's at par with the MSA. So what? You just told me a lot of stuff. Some of it I could see, some of it I couldn't see. So what does it mean? So just food for thought. So you're growing faster than the region, which is good, but the region's not growing fast, which is not necessarily good. Because to some degree, your economy, you are a subset of the economy. And one of the things that you have is you have land, and so you can pick up growth that you can't really put in other parts of the region. But the region overall, this is not Dallas-Fort Worth, as an example, right? So the good news about that, because you do have growth, but you're not growing so fast, you have time to think about how you want to grow, which in my head is about density and use, like how much and what is it, and where across your community. Without having to do what I would call real-time planning, which is suddenly 18,000 housing units showed up to get permitted. And like, what do we do now? How do we put in infrastructure, all that kind of stuff? You don't have that problem. The good news is that you are diversifying across professional employment and self-employment, which is good. Those are good drivers of jobs. But you do have this mismatch that we talked about available jobs in the city versus who your residents are. And the question is, do you care? Do you want more of your residents working and living in the city? Is that important to you all? Particularly in a region where nobody does that. Again, the ag sector is productive and competitive, but it looks like about a third of it, from the reporting that was done in the Census of Agriculture, it looks about a third of it at retirement age. What happens? Particularly to that land. And the other thing is that housing is becoming more expensive, especially for renters. You have the opportunity for job growth because you have land. What is going to be the balance between jobs and housing growth, particularly as it relates to industrial growth? You have a lot of there's a lot of warehousing being developed. It takes up a lot of land. It does create jobs. It has a different employment density than other types of employment uses. So what is that balance between? Do you care about the jobs to housing ratio, given where you are overall in the community? And with that, I'll take questions.
Thank you for your
I
presentation.
can't see your name, so I'll just
That's all right.
point at me.
Thank you for your presentation. There's a lot of information there. Really quick, before we proceed, I failed to mention that Councilman Johnson will not be present tonight, and he has been excused. So with that, I'll ask Council if you have any questions or comments. Councilman Goldberg.
Thank you, Mayor. That's a lot of information that you've just given to us, and we've seen it for maybe 20 minutes.
Yeah.
There's a lot to that. I was quite interested in where we're compared to the region and the region not growing. Years ago, that was a big push here to have this region get into the top 15 in the nation, and we were pushing to that. Now it looks like that we're going the opposite direction. We're not growing, such as Savannah and Charleston and the others that you showed. From the growth standpoint, we are a retirement community. We have a lot of military retirement and things of that nature. But on the housing side, I keep hearing out there there's a great need for more housing. Are you showing me that? Are you showing the need for that?
Yep, we didn't do the needs analysis, but just based upon where the prices are and how they've increased steadily, and the region is growing some, and housing production is not keeping pace with that growth, it's inevitable that you're going to need housing.
Thank you. We've known for a long time that we travel everywhere. People, actually, there was a thing one time, we were going to stop anyone who was working from the peninsula from coming to the south side, and we were going to stop anyone from going from the south side to the peninsula and just swap jobs, because they're doing the same thing on each side instead of having to travel all that distance. Obviously, that hasn't changed. We go everywhere. And is this similar to other communities, or metro areas like Atlanta? Say Atlanta for an example, or is that not comparable?
Well, I think I think there's a lot of places. You would be surprised at the number of places that do not employ everybody who lives in their community. That in and of itself is not unusual. I think what is interesting is the fact that you have so much movement among all the communities. And I think this is conjecture on my part, but part of it is, and that's why I use the New York City thing in my head, right? Which is at one point in time, all of those were independent cities. And now they're all part of one city. So you just say, I work and live in New York City. Well, I live in Brooklyn and I work in Manhattan, and that's what you guys got going on. You've got, you got peninsulas, you've got islands, you've got water, you got to cross a bridge or go through a tunnel to get to the jobs. And part of it is also how the region grew as well. I think the question is how it sorts itself out, and one of the interesting questions, and this is going to be no surprise to anybody here, which is for a development community that's largely used to greenfield development, there's not a lot of greenfield left once you get to the peninsula. So that's all infill, redevelopment, knock stuff down, build stuff new. That's a very different model. You and Chesapeake and kind of the other communities right outside of it, you're what's left. So any new growth that's going to be greenfield, there's going to be a lot of pressure for that to be here.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilman Foster.
Thank you for your presentation. Man, that was a great presentation. You opened up my eyes on a couple of things, and I think you just said it a few minutes ago in your conversation, but it was surprising that it's a small percentage, maybe 12%, it's not a big deal, that travel 50 miles or more to go to wherever to be, I'm sure, to be employed. And yeah, Hampton Roads is very diversified because of the fact it's got military installations, of shipyards, and so on and so forth. But then again, do we have enough housing stock to accommodate in the housing portion for those people that want to live here? Because we do have a high ratio of rent cost for people that want to rent. So I'm looking at that from a housing stock, because I keep hearing from different entities out there that we're not where we need to be in the housing stock neighborhood in order to capture those people to want to live here. They can travel shorter distances, for instance, from Suffolk to the naval shipyard, vice versa. So I'm kind of wondering how this is all going to spin and go into place there. I don't know if you have any ideas or thoughts on that.
Stay tuned for part 2 and 3.
Yeah, I guess that's, I'm trying to go ahead of the cart.
It's going to be an interesting question, because there's also there's most of the housing that has been discussed has been thought about as the multifamily housing world. And if you look at what that housing stock typically is from a unit perspective, most of it is studio 1-bedrooms. That's like 50-some% of the typical apartment is studios and 1-bedrooms. The interesting dynamic that we're in is the millennials and Gen Z. So millennials are no longer 25. Some of them are still 25, but most of them are in their 30s now. And most of them are forming families. And I don't know how many of them are going to want to live in studios. That's one. Gen Zs are now coming through, and Gen Zs are I have a Gen Z, I have an old Gen Z and a young millennial. And I live in Boston, and they both moved to Miami and LA. So just give you an idea that it's a really complicated thing about building a community that's attractive to them. But my point is that there's this generational influx going on. The two largest generations in the post-war, one is the boomers, and the second is the millennials. The millennials are actually bigger than the boomers. The boomers are retiring, and the older boomers now are thinking, now there's senior housing that's assisted and other things are needed. And we've got millennials coming into the pipeline who are starting to have families. And they've started a lot later. They started about 10 years later, but they're now at that edge. And so what's really a tricky moment is what is the right kind of housing to encourage, and it has all kinds of implications on tax-based schools. But you also have to remember this: in a community that's dependent upon sales tax, you need rooftops.
Well, the other thing I was going to bring up is the fact that what we're seeing now is an influx of 55 and older communities.
Yeah.
Because we're getting this gnomon that, we don't have enough 55 and older facilities because the boomers are now retiring and want to go to a more, I guess, less maintenance product facility, or not a big house and less land and so on and so forth. So we're getting an influx of 55 and older, and I'm not sure where that's warranted or not warranted, but just listening to your conversation, it sounds like we got to come up with a balance between the millennials and the baby boomers in order to figure out where we're going to fit
Yeah.
our communities and our housing as we move forward, is
Yes.
what I just got from that little bit out of you.
There are two major life transitions taking place at the same time in the two largest generations in the United States. And I'm a Gen Xer, so I don't count.
Right.
Like, nobody cares what we do. So, but that's literally happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
One is starting to form households and have kids. The other one is thinking, what's next?
Yeah, I get it. It's going to be a ride, but I thank you for your comments, and
You're welcome.
thank you for being here this evening.
Councilman Ward?
Yes, I want to know what advantage is that more people that work in Suffolk and leave Suffolk, like the percentage, what's best for that?
I don't think there is an ideal percentage. I think it depends upon what kind of community you want to be and how important that is. I mean, ways to think about it is the amount of people on the road to work means wear and tear on roads. If there are more people living and working here, you have a better chance of capturing more of their discretionary consumable dollar, which if you're getting sales tax, you want every incremental dollar of their spending that you can get. The flip side of that is that you need more density. You're going to have buildings with bigger heights. You're going to have buildings that you're just going to have to have more that's bigger, particularly on the employment side.
Let me ask you another question. I visited Charlotte, and you said something about Charlotte, and I noticed that 10 years ago, Charlotte is not what it looked like now when you had the young generation. So if you tie into that, what suggestion here, how we can get that young generation involved?
I think how to get the young generation involved, that's part of the outreach plan that's going through the next sets of phases and the more focused discussions. You know, part of it's going to be, it's not incredibly complicated, but it's also not easy because sometimes it requires shifts in the culture of the community. And I'm sorry, I have a cough drop in my mouth because I can feel my voice going. But it's a generation that has grown up, particularly if you think about millennials, it's a generation that has grown up, most of them have lived at least for a portion of their time in an urban environment. They've come to expect certain kinds of amenities. They want certain kinds of lifestyles. They want choices. But they also, there's other things that they're looking for now. They want quality schools. They want a house that they can actually afford. You have to remember, a lot of them are carrying, if they only went to undergraduate school, a lot of them are carrying $40,000 in debt. If they went to grad school on top of that, a lot of them are carrying $100,000 plus in debt. So affordability matters, but affordability that's quality and value, not just cheap. So it's a really, like I said, it's a really complicated moment in time. And in a place like this community where you have some new housing stock, but you also have some very old housing stock that's interesting, but not necessarily in the greatest shape in the world, some of that housing would be very attractive because it's smaller, but it needs a lot of work. And so that's part of the question around housing, which is what do we do with the existing housing stock, particularly the older housing stock that's interesting, it's smaller, it's already, you don't have to pay for infrastructure, but it needs upgrades.
Thank you.
Councilperson Butler Barlow.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of questions. So this was mostly about, well, I want to go back to this idea that there's people that live here and work someplace else, and then there's people that live some, whatever. Yeah, I'm not saying it right, but anyway, it's about even. Are we going to have any data on why those folks are making those choices?
It will depend on how the public input process gets. We know where they go. We know what kind of jobs they're going to. What we do know, particularly for Suffolk residents, is that, like I said, your job base doesn't necessarily meet the educational levels of the people who live here. They have more education than the jobs you have typically in the community. So some of them are just leaving to go get better jobs. What that probably means in the converse is that some of the rest of the communities have jobs that have higher education requirements, and people in those communities can't get those jobs, so they're coming here. Okay. So at its simplest level, that is certainly one level. My other suspicion is that it's affordability, right? The old axiom of your commute is directly proportionate to when you qualify for a mortgage. Probably, particularly at one period of time when you guys were the only place building single-family housing, and it's still much less expensive than on the peninsula. So that's probably another key component too.
Right, it
Beyond
just
that,
seems like- yeah.
we'd have to ask that question very specifically, and
Right. It
my
just-
guess is it's going to be those two reasons.
It seems, yeah, and that's great. It seems like that we need to know what factors are driving people one way or the other before we decide what we need to do to either attract them or make them come,
Yeah, well, it's really clear based upon the information on just simply the jobs available here
Right.
versus
Right.
jobs elsewhere, that part of it is just the nature of the jobs.
Right.
I suspect the other one is housing prices.
My other question is, I appreciate, I was looking for the agriculture numbers, and I am a local farmer, but, and I was concerned they weren't going to be in there, and then, I was pleased that it's a whole separate thing, and I know that that's the way ag is counted separately from the rest of the economy. And you gave job numbers and outlook numbers because we are getting older, but will we see at some point economic impact from the different job markets that we have here, including agriculture? I mean, will that be a part of this plan?
It's not typically, because this is not, again, this is a chapter in the comp plan. If there was a bigger economic development plan, then you would go into the multipliers and all that. But, so, not for this.
Okay, all right, I'll look for that someplace else. Thank you.
Councilman Goldberg.
Thank you, Mayor. One more question. You talked about the two generations, the older and the one
Yeah.
coming up, and the children
Yeah,
and
and I
so
didn't
on.
talk about my own. 'Cause
Yeah,
like I said,
we
it
have to
doesn't count.
figure here, schools, and how do we, the funding of schools, and how do we do that? And your information is going to hopefully help us, give us some insight into that, I expect.
It's, the school piece isn't part of the comp plan, but clearly a land use strategy that relates to fiscal capacity has to be something that's thought about.
Vice Mayor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. On the housing, you were saying 37,000. Is that was built?
Units.
In the
that-
pipeline?
Yeah, that are estimated to exist right now.
It's estimated to be built.
No, that's here now.
That's here now. Okay, so you don't have what is in the pipeline for the future?
No. Again, this was to set base conditions, so we know where we're starting from, and then all of these questions are part of the planning effort. Particularly, it'll start showing up in the Phase 3 piece.
Yeah, because I would like to know, I think that's something that would be interesting to know, how much is approved out there. We know what you have, but there continues to rezone. So I'm just wondering how much property or housing.
Yeah, that will definitely be
units.
part of the future land use
Okay.
piece.
All right, thank you.
Council, any other questions or comments? Without hearing any, I've got a few comments, concerns, questions. I don't know. There's a lot of statistics out there, and you went through them pretty quick. First, I'd like to request that everyone on council get a copy of this so they can digest it. Secondly, I don't know how much of this information is actually incorporated into the comp plan per se.
It'll be, so there's a base conditions report that gets written. It has this population demographic statistics, existing land use pieces. What am I missing? That's pretty much it. Yeah, so all of this information will be in a base conditions chapter of the report.
Okay. I've got a little bit of concern with the numbers, because anytime we use in my opinion, it's hard to use an average number for the city as a whole, simply because we are as diversified as we can and geographically separated to the extent that we are. When it comes to economics, we have census blocks with average income of $26,000 or $28,000. We have census blocks in other areas of the country, other areas of the city that are 120,000 plus. When you're looking at where we need housing and why people are going from one place to another, I think it's important that the city, if you will, is dissected a little bit more than just the average, because I don't think the average has a whole lot of relevance, to be honest with you. I really don't. I mean, Holland and Whaleyville are not northern Suffolk in any comparison whatsoever. You see people coming and going, and I know a lot of folks that live in Harborview that work in Norfolk or Portsmouth, but they don't want to live in Norfolk and Portsmouth. They want to live in Suffolk. We have folks that work at the shipyard that want to be able to live where they can have an acre or 2 acres or 3 acres, which are not available anywhere near where they work. So I think I don't think you can do a proper analysis without separating the city to some extent. When we talk about how far you have to go to work, I mean, depending on where you live in Suffolk, you can live in Suffolk and have to travel 30 miles to work in Suffolk. I mean, that's the reality of it. If you live near the Franklin line, you live in Suffolk, and if you work in Harborview, you're going to travel 30 miles. So I just think that we are not a one-size-fits-all city when it comes to doing your normal analysis. You can do it in Norfolk, you can do it in Portsmouth, you can't do it in Suffolk. So that's my 2 cents worth. I just want to make sure that we have accurate information to work with when we're formulating this comp plan, and for that comp plan to be relevant, to be accurate, in my opinion, we can't rely on these average figures that you're showing us from Suffolk. My opinion. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, with that, thank you very much. We
You're
appreciate your presentation.
Thanks.
Okay, that is our only open session item. We do have need for a work session this evening. Madam Clerk, will you present the motion for consideration?
Item number 1, pursuant to Virginia Code Sections 2.2-37A11A8 and A1, consultation with legal counsel employed by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the legal advice of such counsel, and the discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for appointment and the assignment, appointment, and performance of specific public officers or appointees of the city, specifically the appointments as shown on the attached list for vacancies or term expirations for the Agricultural Advisory Committee, the Clean Community Commission, the Early Childhood Development Commission, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, the Historical Landmarks Commission, the Human Services Advisory Board, the Local Board of Building Code Appeals, the Tidewater Youth Services Commission, and the Western Tidewater Water Authority. Item number 2, pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A5 and 7, the discussion of a prospective business or industry or the expansion of an existing business or industry where no previous announcement has been made of the business or industry's interest in locating or expanding its facilities in the community, and consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically concerning an EDIP proposal regarding Project Dynamo.
Councilman Fawcett.
Move to approve, Mayor.
A motion for approval from Councilman Fawcett. Do I hear a second? Councilman Goldberg.
Second, Mayor.
Second from Councilman Goldberg. Is there any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, council members prepare to vote. Please vote. Madam Clerk, please record the vote.
The motion is approved by a vote of 7-0.
This work session is adjourned, and we will reconvene at 6 p.m.